Hi guys, welcome to the next video on the chapter Nationalism in India. In the previous video we discussed about the various causes what led to civil disobedience movement, how Gandhi negotiation happened, the Gandhi-Irwin Pact happened, how it broke down, and the details about the civil disobedience movement. In this video we'll be discussing the participation of the various social groups and the non-participation of some social groups. Now, we had rich peasants, we had poor peasants, we had businessmen, we had working class, we have women participation. So we'll be discussing all of that in this topic. Now, about the rich peasants, if we talk about the different communities, Patidars, the Jats of Uttar Pradesh, they actually were producers of commercial crops. And when the economic depression hit in the late 1920s, they were really hard hit by them and the prices for their product fell. So their cash income disappeared. So this made it impossible to pay the government revenue. So the government revenue was fixed. The government did not reduce the revenue demand. So this was the concern about for the rich peasants, that the government was demanding a fixed revenue, but their prices had fallen and their revenue had fallen down. So this led to widespread resentments. So the rich peasants actively and enthusiastically supported the civil disobedience movement. So even when some members were reluctant, they were also forced to participate because their community, it was in the favor of that community. So they started boycotting the various the government products, imported products. So the fight for Swaraj for them was limited only to the high revenues. For them, they were not really interested in getting freedom. They were only interested in making a reasonable amount of money. So this was the motives of the rich peasant. And when the civil disobedience movement was called off in 1931, then and no revenue rates were revised. This led to disappointment among the rich peasants. So when the rich peasants were disappointed, and when the civil disobedience movement started again in 1932, many of them refused to participate. So this was a reason why there was less fervor around the restart of the civil disobedience movement. Now, coming to the poor peasants, they were also struggling in a sense that the trade depression hit them as well, and due to falling prices, they were not able to pay money for the rent that they have taken for small lands. So, for their cash income dwindled, and this led to difficulties in paying rent. So their demand was that the revenue should be lowered for the small peasants, and whatever unpaid rent they had not given, that should be remitted. So this was the demands of the poor peasants. So they joined a variety of radical movements, including the civil disobedience movement, but the Congress did not support the no rent campaign. The Congress said no, if you owe rent, you have to pay rent. Because if they would have accepted this no rent campaign, this would have upsetted the rich communities which were supporting the civil disobedience movement. So because the rich were already supporting civil disobedience movement, the poor, the Congress could not support the entire demands of the poor peasants. So the relationship between poor peasants and Congress was uncertain. Sometimes they were going to support, sometimes they did not support. Now, coming to the business class. Business class actually was the one that was most affected by the trade depression as well as the import of goods from foreign. So the colonial practice restricted their business, and their demand was that they should get protection against import of foreign goods. And they also wanted a rupee sterling forex ratio because this was discouraging imports. So they wanted more imports to get discouraged and their products getting used. So they wanted that whatever the ratio there is right now, it should increase so that the imports gets costlier. So this was their demand by the business class. Now, so they also formed an Indian Industrial Commerce Congress and FICCI. So these were the two things, committees and organizations started by the business class. And the two prominent business class members here were G.D. Birla and Purushottam Das Thakur Das. So they too were prominent members here, and they attacked the colonial rule. And the business class, as we discussed, they supported the civil disobedience movement, and they actually gave financial assistance as well. So because of this reason, the business class was very essential for the civil disobedience movement, but not entirely enthusiastic about the round table conference, because what had happened is that they were apprehensive about the spread of military activities, and when there was prolonged disruption, they withdrew support, because it had gone for more than a year, more than 2 years in fact, and there was no result coming out of the civil disobedience movement. So the business class actually withdrew their support, because they had to focus again on their economic activities. So this was the case of business class. Then after business class comes the industrial workers who were working for this business class. Now, since the business class had joined, the workers stayed aloof. Since the industrialists came closer to the Congress, the workers stayed aloof, because they were of the opinion that the industrialists were closer to Congress. So not a large numbers participated in the civil disobedience movement, except in Nagpur of course, because some workers did participate, strikes of railway workers, strike of dock workers. So in 1930, thousands of workers in Chota Nagpur tin mines wore Gandhi caps and participated in rallies. So these are some of the exceptions to the norm, where the industrial workers mostly stayed away from the civil disobedience movement. So the Congress was also apprehensive, because had they went and supported these industrial workers, the industrialists would have got isolated. So this was the fear among the Congress. Now let's discuss about the participation of women as well. So there was large scale participation. The examples are plenty. During the Salt March also, thousands of women came to listen in. Then there were protest marches, and when women participation was quite high, so they broke laws as well, picketed foreign clothes, went to jail. But these are all examples of their presence in the civil disobedience movement. But the situation, their social hierarchy that was created, that was not disrupted. The strata that had been created, where men and women had different social structure, at that moment, that did not change during the civil disobedience movement. And the changes that were there was just participation and nothing else. The Congress was also reluctant to change any position, because they were only keen on the symbolic presence. They only wanted mass numbers. They did not wanted the change in the social structure. So this was the reason why the social structure did not change. Now, the limits of the civil disobedience movement was that it did not get participation from some crucial social groups. The most important being the Muslims. So the Muslims and the Dalits. The Dalits, of course, were the ones who were among the lower strata of the social structure. The Congress ignored the Dalits, because the Congress was getting support from the upper class Hindus, and if they had supported the Dalits, they could have been offending the upper class Hindus. So this was the opinion of the Congress leaders, but Gandhi still supported them. In fact, Gandhi himself cleaned public toilets to dignify their work, but that was not enough for the Dalits. They wanted something else. So they wanted reservations, they wanted separate electorate. So in fact, this demand for separate electorate is the reason why they actually got this demand approved. But Gandhi was against this separate electorate, because they said, if you want to integrate the untouchables and the Dalits, you have to ensure that there are no separate electorates. They should vote only in the general category. So Gandhi was against this separate electorate. So when it was approved by the government, Gandhi went on a fast on to death. So when the government accepted the demand, Gandhi went on the fast up to death, which led to Ambedkar who was the Dalit leader at that time, to finally accept Gandhi's position, and he said, we won't go for separate electorates, we'll only go for reserved seats. So they got reserved seats, but the votes will be in general electorate. So this is what Ambedkar went for. This is known as the Pune Pact. In the pact between Ambedkar and Gandhi is known as Pune Pact. So the Dalit participation overall for the civil disobedience movement was limited. Then the civil disobedience movement not just left the Dalits out of the movement, also did not affect a lot of Muslims as well. So after the decline of Khilafat movement, the Muslims felt as if they have been alienated and Congress had become a Hindu national group. So this was the opinion of a lot of Muslims, and this relationship worsened over time. A clear divide had been created among the Muslims and the Congress. So the Muslims organized a lot of religious processions, the Hindus as well, and there was a lot of violent behavior in that. So there were communal clashes and riots in various cities. Then efforts were also made to negotiate when Jinnah was willing to give up separate electorate for reserved seat, but on the other hand, M.R. Jayakar of Hindu Mahasabha said the issue should not be resolved. We should not listen to any demand from the Muslim leaders. So this was the opinion of the Hindu Mahasabha, and this led to a clear divide where Hindu and Muslims were a clear distinction in the political society. So this was the reason why not a lot of them joined the civil disobedience movement. So this brings us to the end of the civil disobedience movement in its entire structure.